Hello, this is Chris Parker with the Business Simplicity podcast, and I had an amazing conversation with Didier Marlier from the Enablers Network, for which I am also a member. And we went into how to shift from a leaderless organization to a leaderful organization, and use some examples from particularly from sports, from Didier's experience, and then we start wrestling with some of those opportunities on how to create the organization for people to be more self-managing and find that harmony over time. So hey Dees, why do you think people would find this really valuable to listen to it?
I would assume that in those times of disruption, people are interested to see what's changing in terms of leaders. What can leaders do? The overarching model that's still present is the old way of leading, organizational pyramidal, leader seniority, superiority, or the sole leader. Then we move towards the more complex adaptive system theory, which is the leaderless organization, the intelligent organization, to a leader-full of organization, where the difference between a leaderless and a leaderful is that in a leaderless, we tend to hold back the too powerful leaders so that the less vociferous, vibrant leaders can also move. In the leaderful organization, we create psychological safety so that everyone can do and be their best and lead. Everybody is expected to lead. So that's the sort of reflection we start to engage in, even for our own network, for the enablers community.
The Business Simplicity Podcast, where leaders share their most successful strategies and the failures that inspired them, so business owners and managers can avoid the suffering and reap the benefits. With your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to the Business Simplicity Podcast. This is Chris Parker, and I'm having a conversation with Didier Marlier, a dear friend for, I think, over 20 years. I originally met Didier, and he was a professor, I want to say, of leadership and organizational dynamics or something like that at the MBA that I did at Nairobi. And those of you that don't know that story, as this American who wanted to get an MBA and had some love for the Netherlands and found a university that had a castle in it. And so in that castle, so to speak, was Didier and other professors. But Didier also was the sponsor of my thesis that I did on complex adaptive systems in professional services. And it's absolutely marvelous start of a journey. Later, I was a customer. So I I hired Enablers Network and Didier to do some work on some of the projects I was doing when I was the CIO of LeasePlan. And later, it sort of flipped around when Didier invited me to come on as a coach and facilitator, running some leadership development programs through Enablers, which was an absolute joy. And talking about crossing the threshold on a hero's journey to be able to perform with people that I considered absolute masters was such a gift. And more recently, we've been working together with other masters, and we're recreating the Enablers Network, which I am a delightfully proud member of. And we're going to unpack that a little bit and talk about what it means to create a community of leaders that are serving other leaders. And I'm really fascinated in where this goes. So Didier, maybe before we get into the meat of the conversation, can you share in your own words very briefly, like, what is it that Didier Marlier does? Like, what do you do?
Thank you, Chris. Well, first of all, thank you for saying my name in the right way. For most of my American friends, I need to stop it at DDA and say it's like written DJ, because that's as far as it can go.
Mm.
So thank you for taking the whole DDA Marlier in one go. When my daughter was 5, I guess, something, I was invited to speak to her professor, because professor said that, just out of curiosity, I've asked the children to describe what their mother and father, if both or one of the two, what job they were doing. And your daughter said that your job is to bring adult people together, sit them together so that they can have good discussions together. Are you a priest? Are you? I said no. So I explained to her the job we do. Um, I like to say that our job is to bring intelligent people together, our clients, and try to make their collective thinking even more intelligent than the most intelligent of them, the highest IQ. I would like the collective IQ, the average of the collective IQ, to be higher than the highest of the individual IQ in the team. So that's roughly what we do, and we apply this to what we call the disruption economy, which is this new economy that has started at the end of the last century, but it's growing faster and faster. Artificial intelligence, digital, you name it, and COVID, and it's the consequences of the COVID, which were unintended, of course. We work on everything that has to deal with the psychological aspect of change, what we call change leadership. We work with leadership development. The biggest business schools are our main competitors, but where we win is because we do it differently than them, and we do personal and team coaching. And I also thank you because in the very tight, vibrant, but highly informal way that the enablers community works together, you have become, without us ever mentioning it, or without us ever talking about it, my informal and extremely impactful and powerful coach. So thank you for that. So this is a bit of me, and this is a bit of our relationship. And what I'd like to suggest to your auditors and to you as well, Chris, is to run a session where I'm not going to come as the expert, or I'm not going to come and tell you my wisdom and how great what what I've done, but I'd rather throw a few thoughts at you and ask you and your auditors at the end of the podcast if they can get back to us about a topic which came in the recent first meeting of the new enablers, which we call the enablers community. A topic that came and that really woke me up and opened my eyes against something I used to say for the last at least 20 years of my career. So I'd rather see this meeting as an exchange of discussion as we normally have, you and I, rather than me being talking the whole time.
Well, I think let's go with it and play with it. And you said auditors, but as audience. So when we're going through this, I think there is a opportunity for people listening or watching after this to find the post on LinkedIn that Didier and I will be on. And we would love any reflections or feedback or thoughts because we're going into, I don't want to say uncharted territory, but we're discovering new territory for ourselves. And so Didier had a marvelous idea to also open it up and see if there's insights or learnings or experiences from out in the world that we can benefit from and we can share further. So so great. But what is this thing that you've been working on for 20 years and it's starting to shift?
Okay, so thank you. For the past 20 years at least, as you know, one of our common, you and I, point of interest was what is called complex adaptive system theory, and this being applied to leadership, business leadership. As you know, and your auditors don't, I also work with a very famous coach in Switzerland, Fabio Celestini, and he was awarded the best football coach of the year in Switzerland in the year 2016. He had been the captain of the Olympique Marseille squad, so pretty decent CV. And he's also interested in trying to see how can we pretty much like Pep Guardiola. He and Pep are close friends. You can see Pep trying to do something rather similar, how to apply complex adaptive system theory to the world of football, to a football squad. And one of the things I believed, I advocated, was the leaderless organization, in the sense that the prehistorical model, which has lasted till now, it's one of the very few things that hasn't changed. All of the technologies around us changed, but one thing hasn't changed is the way we organize and lead. It's always the strongest, the wisest, the most competent that is at the top, chooses a little bit less wise, a little bit less competent, a little bit less mature people, but loyal to him or to her. And it goes down like this, the pyramidal organization. And I moved from organization to organisms, complex adaptive system. And for those auditors for whom the term is a bit strange, complex adaptive system, are this flock of birds, thousands of birds. I think in Rome, the biggest flock they saw was something like 6 million birds altogether flying, and they studied how this huge flock of birds was flying and not having accidents. You have the same with school of fishes. All these small fishes going left, right. You wonder how do they all follow the same pattern? So that's a complex adaptive system, and uh, so for me, one of the thing was complex adaptive system cannot be an organization with rules, roles, procedures, orders, because it would not have the time nor the intelligence to move when you see an hawk coming at a flock of birds. The flock of birds doesn't have the time to say, watch out, on the top right hand at 10 o'clock is a no, they just react very quickly, and they seem to have a rule. The Polytechnicum of Rome has understood those rules. Is that the birds follow blindly, blind trust, the bird that is ahead of them, and pay attention to those above, below, and on their right and left. And everybody goes like this. And if the front bird sees the hawk, it's going to move, and all the others will split and will follow suit. You may remember even that a while ago, say something like 6 months ago, there was a big mystery in Mexico because a flock of birds all died because they all suddenly crashed in the street at the same time in a wave following each other. And they wonder, what is it? Is it like some of the whales, the dolphins? It's so polluted that they commit suicide. What? And somebody had taken an image by accident before. They weren't trying to film the flock, but they did. And you can see that there seems to be an hawk dawning on the flock. The first birds see it, so they dive to the ground with a firm intention that at the last second they will they will avoid the street, the cobblestones, and they know what they're doing, so they just manage to do it. But the others who are just behind don't have the time to to change the course and crash, and those behind them crash. It's a little bit like the buffalo's story in teaching the elephant how to dance. So that is the second way of leading, an organic way of leading a leaderless organization. If I go back to football, you may remember that those of you at least who like the soccer or football in '98, the French haven't forgotten. They finally won the World Cup of football. And their coach was an amazing man. One of his feats of courage, he had decided not to take with him the guy that had just been awarded for the first time in history, a foreigner had been awarded the title of best player of the English Championship. And not only was it a foreigner, but he was also a French. So something unseen since. And his name was Eric Cantona. If you know football, soccer, everybody knows him. He's a living legend. And so Aimé Jacquet, the coach of the French, decided not to take Cantona to the World Cup because his shadow, he was overshadowing. He was the big tree that would prevent the small trees to grow to their best level to eventually win the World Cup. So he courageously made the move and was shot in flames by the press and by the people. He took the decision not to take Cantona with him and to go with the second level players who rose up to the occasion and became world champion. So that's what I would say the leaderless organization. In our recent Enablers community meeting, one of our and it was interesting, one of the youngest consultant partners present, Candace Nkot-Bisek, who is originally from Cameroon, started to speak about and challenge me on that and speak about the Leaderful organization. The leaderless organization is Jacquet removing his most talentuous, best player so that the others can raise at a higher level. The Leaderful organization would have been keep Cantona and raise the others to his level. Of course, they didn't have the time. Of course, it's easier said than done, etc., etc. But I'm just looking at our humble organization, 34 people for the moment, and growing. If you look at the talent we have, to name a few. Marie-Emmanuelle has been an officer for the French Navy for 14 years. She's a woman. She was the first woman officer of her level into the whole story of the French Navy. And you've seen her. She's a tough cookie and very bright and very capable. You have Nick McRoberts, who is one of the most praised conductor of his generation, Australian living in France, wrote already 3 operas and I don't know how many adagios. Conductor of symphonical orchestra. We have Julio Rosarena, who has been for 12 years, if my memory is correct, the star ballet dancer of the god of choreographers, Maurice Béjart. And now himself a choreographer in France. You have people like this, and then you have consultants like us. You have people with more more normal, quote unquote, CVs, but extraordinary personal histories. It almost looks like we hire them for the quality of the history of their past life rather than what they are in their CV. And I guess I would love to believe it's true. Now, if we become a leaderless organization, because some of the seniors or some of these characters have too strong characters, and we ask them to hold back their strength, hold back their character, we cut the enablers from an incredible power, knowledge, way of being. So rather than being leaderless, why don't we have 34 empowered, strongly tempered characters? We just need to learn to live together. So the topic I'd like to touch with you and your auditors is about that. Let's not talk about the past, which is still the actual for most of the companies, which is the normal hierarchical seniority means superiority kind of organization with orders, the army style, fine. Going to the organism, something more organic, leaderless. Has ever any one of you been part of a whole organization or a small team, a sub team, a sports team, which had a leader full of organization where everyone, because the organization displays psychological safety, so I can fully be myself with my sense of humor, with my stupid ideas, with my provocation, with my shyness, with my introversion, with whatever I am. I can fully be myself without fear, without being punished. I can bring weird ideas without being mocked at or trivialized. So with psychological safety, with respect, with benevolence, with a high support sort of and high challenge sort of a culture, how can we get everyone to be a leader in the company? And I would say that the Enablers Network, the biggest change is that it used to be belonging to me. I used to be the founder and the CEO, and it was functioning a little bit like an organization led by me with highly skilled freelancers, to the Enablers community, which, as you know, of course, yourself, but your auditors certainly don't. I just gave away the property of the Enablers Network to a foundation, which means there will no longer be owners and tensions about who do I work for, but they will be beneficiaries of a brand, of an exchange of knowledge, of the strength of the leader-full organization rather than the leaderless organization. I said this was going to be a conversation. I realized I've been speaking for minutes and minutes and probably put everybody to sleep. I don't know if you have a reaction, Chris, or pushback, a challenge.
I have many reactions, but it was also joyful to just to experience the story and the different examples there. In my work, having been a CIO and CTO, and worked with other, say, technical leaders, there seems to be a couple different types of leader. Very often, a CTO is a technical expert, and in some cases can be sort of a messiah. So people are there literally worshiping the technical expertise of that person. However, if everyone's worshiping the technical decisions of one person, then the wisdom of that collective is very, very limited. And the speed and the agility of that collective is very limited, because basically any investment decision needs to be vetted, mostly on the opinion of that personality, as opposed to, some sort of structured dialogue, and, to enable other, maybe even innovative or contradictory thoughts to emerge. And then that can work in some cases, like if you need to be working, if the problem is a bit more known, so if okay, we just have to execute this stuff, and we're bringing in a lot of juniors, and we just need to tell those juniors what to do, and they just need to execute. That can work for a while, but if you need to move into some sort of uncharted territory, and in technology that is almost every day, that doesn't really work. And so there are patterns there that, under the flag of agile, like Scrum teams that are cross-functional teams. And then what you find is oftentimes within the technical organization, you're having some cross-functional self-learning, continuously improving, so the style of the organization is shifting and changing. But then it's bumping up against oftentimes a product team that is, say, directorial. So the technical team can create the product, but it's still basically following orders. And the problem with following orders is somebody else is interpreting the needs of the client and customer. And then oftentimes that product team is beholden to the sales team, because the sales team is actually talking to the customer, you hope. And so then and if you have a mismatch of leadership style along that chain, then you're going to have a shift from directing to say co-creating and collaborating. And the issue is that's where the tension will happen. And so what I'm curious about is, how can you have a technical messiah, an expert, existing in a space with say emerging people, or people who maybe never really reached that level of mastery, and get that the experts, the top experts mindset shifted to that person's job is not to instruct others, but it's to create the space for the others to actually flourish and I guess, become the best version of themselves. And those are the two types of leader that I oftentimes see. Is one that is a technical master that is dominant in this. And then there's also one that, maybe it's just a matter of age. I honestly don't know, but it's more, hey, I've been down this path before. I've reached my level of mastery, and now let me return. And it's almost like giving back in a way. And I think an organization needs both of that somehow, but exactly how to strike that balance of directing, situational leadership, I guess, you're directing in some cases, and then just purely enabling in other cases. I don't believe there's a black and white, right or wrong answer there. I think it's continually adapting. What do you think?
Yes, I totally agree with you. There's no right or wrong, black and white answer. What's your thoughts trigger me about those two types of leaders is, again, I would assume, and maybe that's just me, as you know, I'm very black and white, and I'm very I'm quite radical in my thoughts. Going back to the football world, I know when we do have outstanding players, but that are a very bad example. And we've seen in the Swiss Championship, one of the club of my heart, hired a real superstar coming from Italy. No names quoted, but a real superstar. And his behavior was so pathetic that my piece of advice to whoever wanted to hear it was put this guy not even on the bench, but in the public, because he is the specialist that you talk about. He can do anything he wants with the ball. When he decides to play, he can be just 5 minutes on the pitch and he'll score 2 goals and get him back to sit down, and that's enough. But don't make him, for heaven's sake, don't make him the captain of your team, because his behavior is wrong. completely wrong. It just gives the wrong message. They failed to do that, and they ended up being rebated in the in the second division
Hmm.
by not being capable. So my stand to them was get rid of them, and my stand till now was get rid of the terrorist, brilliant leader. Okay, he took the startup off the ground, but he now becomes part of the problem because of often his or her style. That's preaching for the leaderless company. Cut their power base.
Well, it doesn't sound like the
Become a
person was a
more
leader. They were an expert.
then they're an expert. They're an
Yeah.
expert.
So it's
Yeah.
cutting that person out wouldn't make them leaderless because they weren't leading in the first place for me. Being a terrorist
They
is not a leader. Yeah.
no.
I don't know.
They
For
mean
me,
well.
I struggle with it because um, also at our summer university 2 weeks ago, it'll be longer once this is published. Um, Somebody mentioned, same person that you quoted, mentioned that not everyone is deserving of my love. Everyone deserves me to see their humanity, but not everyone deserves my love. And by love, I mean not everyone deserves to receive my grace, maybe not even my maybe forgiveness, because some people's behavior can be so toxic and destructive. I think in order to protect the space of the others, they should be removed. And that doesn't mean you're removing a leader. That
Sure.
means you're removing a toxic. I'd also say that that's
Very interesting.
could be the most compassionate thing for that person, because if their life and their environment has been rewarding them continuously for their behavior, what a disservice for that person to not have that confrontation, that conflict, that punch in the face, that punch in the gut, saying, hey, you are the best player here, but your attitude is so destructive, you're out. So
Yeah.
it's I don't know. So and for me, this is where um life gets very hard. Because how do you decide when someone's worthy of love and grace and forgiveness, or when do you say, I'm sorry, your journey is different than ours. You're you are human, you are worthy of compassion, and you need to go do that somewhere else.
You bring in a distinction that I do like, um, which is when the person is truly toxic for their environment, your duty as a leader, co-leader, or even follower in the army, it would be the same. You have the duty not to obey orders that are toxic from a toxic leader. Now, that's quite risky. There's this famous Hollywood movie on a submarine. I think it's Jane Hackman and Denzel Washington or something like this, as actors,
The Hunt for Red October
where
thing.
where
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, where the second command has to take the decision to arrest the toxic leader. So when the toxicity comes, you need to save the organization, get rid of the genius, get rid of the toxic person, which may not be necessarily the genius. I think you're absolutely right. When you talk about this football player, he had become toxic, and the courage was missing, as far as I know, to get rid of him. Mhm. Or the awareness, maybe. In the case that you brought back, the, the scientist, the smartest guy in the room, to be the elected because he was at the start of the startup, or the de facto because he or she is the wisest woman in the organization. Not necessarily being toxic, but their drive makes it that others can't follow. And I would say that this has been I made many failures as the leaders of the version one of the enablers, call it the enablers network. We were already surrounded by exceptionally bright people, probably some of the best in the industry. And some of these bests really were happy into and did it with great intention with their blazers of seniors. They were driving, they were pushing, they were not compromising on quality, they were raising the bar every time, they were offering tough but very smart, good feedback, which, on the other hand, destroyed or could destroy psychological safety, were high on challenge but low on support, even though the intention was to be high on both, and created the fact that the people following were not capable of performing at their best. Not me inventing feedback and report I get from many of these. So my failure as a leader was either to be punitive on those senior leaders, or being highly supportive but not sufficiently challenging on those who were following, and trying, in other terms, to lower the impact of the highly impactful people and low and high and higher, but the psychological safety for the others. But those two things don't grow at the same time. One is immediate, and the other one takes a long time to grow, trust and confidence. So what you bring in for me is a challenge that many organizations, led factually or how do you say factually or not necessarily in a verbal way, organizationally or not, led by high knowledge leaders. How do you make sure that the knowledge leaders, she remains a high knowledge person, she continues to drive, to pull, she doesn't feel slowed down by the rest of the organization, and she learns to engage as well. She learns to develop the rest of the organization at the same time, or that her drive doesn't draw the rest of the organization exhausted and crazy and dependent from her or from him. I don't know if I'm being clear
Yeah,
or
well,
not.
I've got two thoughts. One, a couple months ago, I was able to go over to London and have a wonderful lunch with Vahid Dami, who is the CEO of LeasePlan, and like you, very very influential on my outlook on life and leadership and management. And one of his, I think maybe his driving principle is do no harm.
Yeah,
And that doesn't mean
like
he
that.
couldn't be hard or harsh, but he could change the way he was interacting. So if he saw that someone was in a certain state, maybe that wasn't the time for brutal honesty. But in some cases he could um, be much more firm and more clear. And what he was always seeking was just to do no harm, be professional, be very clear, be very driving, be very visionary, be very results focused in a very compassionate way. And I think I really like, I think in coming from an engineering and technical space, I believe some of the methods under lean, which has also evolved into sociocracy type models, and also agile, which is coming from, I think, a very similar space, into Scrum. The patterns for which an organization can adopt in structuring their teams and their roles, and to be very cross-functional and self-guiding and self-learning, I think automatically overcome a lot of this. Because if you have one person who's the manager, judge, jury, executioner on a team, then that changes the dynamic a lot. But in a Scrum team where you have a lot of experts, as well as a Scrum master who's basically a coach looking at the space and the flow, and a product owner who's bringing in the work, and so there's one place for the work to come from, prioritized, clear, and then the rest of the organization is able to pull that work based on their understanding of the business goals. There's a lot of wisdom, and so and what I see, what we're trying to do with the new reborn enablers, adopting some sociocracy and holacracy principles, and really leaning into what are the values, what's the vision, the mission, so people can check into it. And then now we have a couple circles formed. One is the community development circle, and on their list is like, okay, well, what does it mean to be an enabler? You can start having that conversation, like how much of an expert do you need to be? I'm curious if they come up with how much of an expert is too much of an expert. I don't know. I'm not sure where they'll go with it, but it's embodying those values that were emerged, they emerged from the community. How do you embody that in some sort of, I don't know, I think sometimes I argue with people about the word self-organizing versus self-managing, because I prefer people to be self-managing within an organizational design. So okay, this is how we talk about the vision of where we're going. These are the boundaries. These are some things we don't do. This is in principle who we serve, and that's roughly the product and service. So there is some, you have organized a path and some boundaries. That's kind of, and then within that you can really free it up and say, okay, now self-manage. And by self-manage, what is the best thing that you can do now to move that needle, to bring that thing forward? And then hey, here's some methods of communication. We have a couple platforms where at least basically you can talk to each other, and some of the principles behind that is, how can I create a space that causes people to have to think less? The cognitive load of existing in that system is less, and it helps them communicate more easily. So if people are less confused and communicating more, then good stuff is going to happen, within that statement of direction and within those boundaries. And then from there, you can't let it go, because every human needs, support and guidance and nudging and a kick in the ass now and again. But it's, but those are the types of systems that I try to create when I'm managing large groups of engineers, particularly cross culture, cross border, all sorts of other complications that you want to, okay, let's create the space to focus on those complications. Let's try to get rid of the rest of the headaches and a lot of the cross-cultural stuff that people come up with. If people are communicating, if they have actually seen the humanity of that other person, a lot of that other noise can go as well. And then people can finally get down to work and start really, pulling together in whatever direction you're going.
I like the distinction you bring in here, and all the work we see. By the way, that's what we try to apply, right? Rather than explaining to our clients what to do, we will first try to apply that to ourselves. And still there'll be limitations what you can do with a 34 and growing community of people, but we don't expect to be 100,000 or 200,000 very soon, thank God. At least we experiment, and I believe, going back to your points, that the sociocracy is, I like the distinction you do between self-led and
self-managing and self-organizing.
Self-organizing, sorry, and self-managing.
It's kind of wordsmithing, because I think you could use the words interchangeably, but for me, how do we organize for people to self-manage?
Yeah. I like that. I really like that. And what I do see, I'm back to thinking, how do we keep intact the flourishing capacity and the psychological safety for the leaders and the geniuses of this world? How do we make sure that they continue to strive, invent, create, challenge the status quo? And how do we raise the creativity, psychological safety for the others, the knowledge? I, as you were saying at the beginning of your intervention, I doubt anyone in our team will say maybe one idea would be to lower the collective competences, or to lower the competences of the so-called geniuses. And there are 34 geniuses. You were there yourself. What can an expert, one of the world's best ballet dancer turn choreographer, I name Julio, what can a man like this bring to a community of business consultants, as we are, or business advisor, or provocateurs, you name it? You would first think not much. And you may remember, Chris, and please disagree if you don't agree, but Julio was one of the wisest, most listened to, captivating, fascinating member of this community because of his capacity to create parallels, metaphors between the body of ballet, a corps de ballet, as we say in French, a choreography, and business imperatives.
Well,
So for me, what I like in the tools you like sociocracy that you offer, or the feel, I would say it's a philosophy rather than tool, that raises the level of everyone rather than having a few leaders who will lead this. No, you have an idea, create your circle, bring the people that want to think with you and work with you, and do it. So I'm really keen, curious, thrilled by all this, and this is just the beginning. Indeed, as you said at the start of our common interview, it's the beginning of the stone starts to be rolling down the slope. But I'd be really keen to continue capturing your own experience, of course, the experience of the enablers community, and very, very important, anyone amongst your auditors who has an idea, who has an advice, who's seen that, who has lived that, even with their family, with their football team, with their team at work, with the organization, in the army, commandos, special forces, for example. I'd be keen to hear that, really keen.
I love it. Sadly, we need to start wrapping up. I would like to one go back to Julio very quickly. I think this is kind of part of the magic that the enablers community can provide. Is okay, world-class ballet. Part of the story that he was sharing, again, we were up on the top of a mountain in Switzerland. It was absolutely gorgeous, and out on the terrace, and mountains behind him. So the whole thing was just staged perfectly. But what really came to me was from that talk was the power of what he mentioned was the silence, the power of silence. I mean, the ballet dancers aren't moving constantly. They're being very conscious about particularly not moving. And in graphic design, it's use of the white space. You don't have to fill everything up. And that reminds me of like 2 months ago, I was doing some workshop with a whole company, doing some open space technology work. And the the challenge that we were giving to those managers was the power of doing nothing, the power of doing less. So you as a manager today, your gift to the collective is actually to do very little. The assignment we gave them was to simply absorb and listen on how they can support others on their missions after that day. And that's a mindset shift, because sometimes managers, there's a room full of employees who I've got to perform because I'm the boss. And if I don't perform, then people will wonder why I'm the boss. And we said, no. Today, you need to lean into the silence. You need to lean into, of course, if you're compelled as a person, as a human of that organization, feel free to engage, but you don't need to manage today. And that was, there were some beautiful parallels from what Julio was talking about. And I would suggest if people want to bring that message into their organization, contact Didier and get Julio over there to talk to him about it, because it was profound. But in wrapping up, I like to underline Didier's suggestion that invitation. If you have ideas or experience in your organization where you've adopted some way of achieving leaderful in a way that balances the needs of, say, the experts of their trade, of their game, and the rest, and creating that in a safe space that is still really achieving tangible results. We would love to hear about that. And I would urge you to, on the show notes of this, I'll put the link to the post on LinkedIn. And so anyone who's listening to this, just look at the show notes, click through to the LinkedIn post, and drop your thoughts right there. And really, really fascinated to see what emerges from that. Didier Marlier from Enablers Network 2.0, for which I'm proudly contributing to. And maybe just a last comment, like, why is Chris involved in Enablers? because Chris, of course, goes, he's a CTO, CIO, tech exec sometimes, and he's a coach and facilitator with Ebullient, my own brand. But the two reasons that I just love working with enablers, one is very selfish, meaning I'm able to express myself and participate in such an amazingly diverse group of absolute experts, and that gives me the opportunity to continue to master my craft and discover my craft, and I don't know of a place like that anywhere else in the world, and it's so beautiful. And then on the commercial side, I do a lot of work with Agile, Scrum, Kanban engineering teams. And a lot of Agile coaches and Scrum Masters are pointing at leadership as the problem. And I don't believe that's true. These are two different worlds. And through enablers, I'm able to work with leaders of multinational organizations and understand what's going on there. Because again, I do not come down to the right or wrong. Agile will not save the world. Agile is a great thing in certain places. And the management structures and the leadership structures that are in place, of course they're going to shift, because we are living in the disruption economy, that things are going to continue to change. And why don't we look at that holistically? So the most senior in the organizations, the body of the people, even the newcomers, the new emerging talent, I believe the way to organize for those people will continue to shift and needs to be different and appropriate for each audience. And for me, enablers is on the leading edge of discovering how to achieve that harmony. And so I love it. Didier Marlier. You can find him at enablersnetwork.com and also on LinkedIn. I'll put all of that on the show notes. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you to your auditors for their patience.
You're welcome. They're still the audience, but they're auditing as well. I believe.
Oh yes, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I believe they are. They're probably listening at this point like an auditor, like what is going on here, and measuring every point of it. So I actually think it's actually a perfect description. So Didi, thanks.
Thank you for listening. Download the Simplicity Toolkit from eBrilliance.com to discover the power of the Simplicity Scan and Sprint. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player.